Asterisk the morning started like any other day on Haven's Rest. Children played in the crystal gardens while their parents worked in the farming domes. The Corellian colony had been peaceful for over 200 years. Nobody expected war to come crashing. Down from the stars, Commander Jake Miller was drinking his morning coffee when the first alarm screamed across the command center. His hands shook as he watched the display screens light up with incoming ships. Hundreds of them, all bearing the blood-red markings of the Drakmor Empire. "Sir, they're not responding to our communication attempts," Lieutenant Amy Foster called out from her station, her voice cracked with fear. The Drakmor were known across the galaxy for one thing. They never took prisoners. The first wave of attacks hit the orbital defense platforms. Jake watched in horror as massive explosions bloomed in space above their world. Each flash of light meant dozens of his people were dead. The platforms that had protected Haven's Rest for generations were being torn apart like paper. "Shields to maximum power," Jake shouted over the noise of alarms and panicking voices. "All defensive weapons, fire at will," but it was useless. The Drakmor fleet was too big, too powerful. Their ships looked like giant metal spiders crawling through space, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. Colony's defenses were built to handle pirates and smugglers. It's not an entire empire's war fleet. The colony ships in orbit tried to run. Jake watched helplessly as civilian transports filled with families were hunted down and destroyed. Escape pods scattered like seeds in the wind, but most never made it to safety. The Drakmor shot them down without mercy. "Sir, the main shield generator is failing." Amy's voice cut through Jake's thoughts. On the main screen, he could see the energy barrier that protected their cities flickering like a dying light bulb. 40,000 people lived on Haven's Rest. Men, women, children, elderly folks who had never hurt anyone in their lives. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, artists. Now they were about to die because the Drakmor wanted their planet's rare minerals. "How long do we have?" Jake asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Maybe 10 minutes before the shields collapse completely," replied Chief Engineer Rick Barnes from his station. The man's face was pale with sweat. "After that, they can bomb the surface directly." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his daughter playing in the schoolyard just that morning. She was probably hiding in the emergency shelters now, scared and crying. All across the colony, families were hugging each other tight, not knowing if they would see another sunrise. Amy Jake said quietly. "Send out the distress beacon. Everything we've got. Every frequency, maximum power, as far as it will reach." Amy's fingers flew across her control panel. "Sir, even if someone receives it, help might not come in time." "Just do it," Jake ordered. "Someone out there might be listening." The SOS signal burst out from Haven's Rest like a scream in the darkness. It carried with it video footage of the attack, the colony's location, and a simple message that every species in the galaxy would understand. "Help us, please. We are dying." The signal raced through space at the speed of light, passing dead worlds and empty star systems. It traveled for hours, growing weaker with each passing moment. Most of the galaxy ignored it or simply couldn't help. But at the very edge of known space, in a region that most aliens avoided, the signal reached something that had been sleeping for 30 years. Far away on Earth's orbital command station, Admiral Tom Bradley was reading reports when his communication officer burst into his office. The young man's face was white with shock. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," the officer said, his voice shaking. Tom looked at the transmission data and felt his blood turn cold. The footage showed civilians running for their lives while alien warships rained death from above. It showed children crying in bomb shelters. It showed a colony that would be nothing but ash and radiation in a few hours. "Get me, Captain Lisa Roberts," Tom said, his voice hard as steel. "And wake up the Ghost Fleet. It's been sleeping long enough." Without warning, her vessel was smaller than the others, but deadlier in many ways, could phase in and out of normal space, appearing inside enemy formations to deliver killing blows. "Ghost Fleet coming online," she reported over the communication. "System. All stealth systems operational, ready to hunt." Communications Officer David Clark coordinated the awakening from his station aboard the command vessel. His screens showed ship after ship powering up their engines and weapons. The Thunderbolt, the Reaper, the Storm's End. The Night Terror, each name carried the weight of humanity's violent past. 27 vessels reporting full operational status, David announced. Fusion core stable, weapons charged, AI systems active. Tom Bradley looked out at his fleet and felt a chill run down his spine. These ships represented everything humanity could become when pushed too far. They had been built after the last Great War, when Earth almost fell to alien invaders. The lesson learned was simple. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared. Each vessel carried weapons that most aliens thought were impossible. Gravity cannons that could crush enemy ships into tiny balls of metal. Time dilation fields that aged enemy hulls to dust in seconds. Phased torpedoes that passed through shields like they weren't even there. But it wasn't just the weapons that made the Ghost Fleet terrifying. It was the crews. Every person aboard these ships had been chosen for their skill and their willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect humanity. They were the best of the best, and they had been training for this moment their entire lives. Across the galaxy, alien sensor stations detected the massive energy signatures leaving human space. The readings were so powerful that many aliens thought their equipment was broken. Surely no fleet could generate that much energy without tearing itself apart. Ambassador Dash. The Elvas of the Corellian High Command received the sensor data and immediately sent out warnings to every government in the galaxy. The humans were mobilizing their war fleet for the first time in decades. Something big was happening. On his command ship, above Haven's Rest, Drakmor Supreme Commander Vaktar received these warnings and laughed. His officers looked at him nervously, but he waved away their concerns. Humans? He sneered, his four eyes gleaming with amusement. Those weak creatures haven't fought a real war in 30 years. They hide behind their borders like frightened children. What could they possibly do against the might of the Drakmor Empire? His second in command, a scarred veteran named Zekmar, wasn't so sure. Sir, the energy readings suggest these aren't normal ships. Perhaps we should request reinforcements. Vaktar's laugh echoed through the bridge. Reinforcements? To deal with human pacifists? We have already destroyed their colony's defenses. In a few hours, Haven's Rest will be nothing but ash and radiation. Let the humans come. They can watch their alien friends burn. But deep in his heart, Vaktar felt the first stirring of unease. The Drakmor Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had always avoided human space. There were stories, old legends about why the galaxy once feared Earth's children. Most aliens dismissed. These tales as myths, soon Vaktar would learn that some myths were based on terrible truths. Space itself seemed to tear open above Haven's Rest as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. One moment there was nothing but empty void, and the next 27 massive warships hung in the darkness like sleeping giants suddenly awakened. From a long dream, on the surface of Haven's Rest, people stopped running and looked up at the sky. The Corellian colonists had never seen ships like these. They were dark as midnight, with smooth hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, even from the ground. You could tell these vessels were built for war. Commander Jake Miller stared at his sensors in disbelief. The energy readings from the human ships were impossible. His equipment had to be broken. No fleet could generate that much power without melting their own hulls. Sir, Lieutenant Amy Foster whispered, her voice filled with awe. I'm picking up communication signals from the human fleet. They're talking to each other like this is just another day at the office. In space above the colony, Supreme Commander Vaktar felt his confidence waver for the first time. Since the attack began, his intelligence reports had said humans were weak, that they flew small patrol ships and avoided conflict, that the vessels floating before him were monsters. The largest one stretched over a kilometer long, bristling with weapon systems he couldn't even identify. Yes, sir. Our sensors can't get a proper reading on their weapons, reported his tactical officer, fear creeping into his voice. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Vactor's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the human fleet. Something was wrong. These ships looked ancient, like they had been built decades ago. But the power readings suggested technology far beyond anything the Drakmor Empire possessed. "Run a deep scan," he ordered. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Before his sensors could penetrate the human ship's hulls, a voice echoed across every communication frequency in the system. It was calm, controlled, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Drakmor forces. This is Admiral Tom Bradley of the Terran Ghost Fleet. You have 60 seconds to cease hostilities and withdraw from this system." On his command bridge, Vactor laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. "Ghost Fleet. These humans think they can scare us with spooky names." His bridge crew wasn't laughing. They'd all heard the stories their grandparents told about the old days when humans first appeared in the galaxy. Back then, alien fleets would retreat at the mere sight of human ships. But those were just stories, weren't they? "Human Admiral?" Vactor broadcast back, his voice dripping with mockery. "You are interfering with a legal military operation.
I'll leave now.
Or face the consequences." The response came not in words, but in action. Vactor ordered his gunners to fire everything they had at the human flagship. Dozens of plasma torpedoes streaked through space, each one powerful enough to punch through a battleship's armor. The weapons struck the human ship called Sovereign and simply disappeared. Not destroyed, not deflected, they vanished as if they had never existed at all. The massive human vessel didn't even seem to notice the attack. "Impossible," Vactor breathed, his confidence crumbling like sand. Captain Mike Johnson sat in the command chair of his destroyer Vengeance, watching the enemy attack with calm interest. His ship's AI spoke in his earpiece with a voice that sounded almost bored. "Captain, shall I return fire?" "Their weapons are quite primitive." Mike looked at his targeting display. 3 Drakmor battlecruisers hung in space directly ahead there. Crews probably celebrating what they thought was a successful attack on the human flagship. "One shot," Mike said quietly. "Make it count." The Vengeance's main cannon was unlike anything else in the galaxy. It didn't fire energy beams or explosive shells. Instead, it launched a focused gravitational field that could crush matter at the atomic level. The weapon had no visible beam, no flash of light. One moment, the 3 enemy ships were there, and the next they were gone, not destroyed, but compressed into tiny balls of super-dense matter that collapsed in on themselves. "Warning shot complete," Admiral Mike reported over the fleet channel. His voice as calm as if he had just swatted a fly, awaiting further orders. Across the Drakmor fleet, alarms began screaming. 3 of their most powerful warships had vanished in an instant, and their sensors couldn't even explain how. The enemy weapon had produced no energy signature, no radiation, nothing that made sense according to known physics. Vactor stared at his tactical display in horror, where 3 proud battlecruisers had been moments before. There was now only empty space and some rapidly dissipating particles. His finest ships, crewed by thousands of his best warriors, had been erased from existence with a single shot. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, his voice shaking with terror. "What do we do?" For the first time in his military career, Supreme Commander Vactor of the Drakmor Empire had no answer. He was facing something that should not exist, a fleet that could make his ships disappear with casual ease. The humans hadn't even used their full firepower. That had been a warning shot. The Ghost Fleet hung in space like patient predators, waiting to see if their prey would be wise enough to run or foolish enough to fight. Either way, the legends of human warfare were about to be written in fire and blood once again. Supreme Commander Vactor made the biggest mistake of his life when he decided to keep fighting. Instead of retreating after seeing his 3 battlecruisers vanish, he ordered his entire fleet to attack the human ships. He thought superior numbers would make the difference. He was wrong. What happened next would be talked about in alien military academies for centuries to come. The humans didn't just fight back, they unleashed weapons that most species thought were impossible myths from. Old Stories Commander Kate Wilson's stealth cruiser Phantom suddenly disappeared from all sensors. One moment it was floating in space with the rest of the human fleet, and the next it was gone. The Drakmor crews celebrated, thinking they had destroyed it. Their celebration lasted exactly 12 seconds. The Phantom materialized inside a group of enemy destroyers, its hull phasing through their shields like they were made of air. Kate's weapons fired at point-blank range, tearing the alien ships apart from the inside. Before the enemy could react, her ship vanished again, only to appear in another formation and repeat the deadly dance. Ghost-class stealth ship reporting. Kate's voice came over the communication channel, calm and professional. 7 enemy vessels eliminated. Moving to next target, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Martinez commanded the massive assault carrier Thunder. His ship was different from the others. Instead of heavy guns, it carried hundreds of small fighter craft. But these weren't ordinary fighters. When the launch bays opened, what came out looked more like living metal than spacecraft. The human fighters moved through space like schools of fish, flowing around enemy fire and striking with impossible precision. Each pilot controlled not just one ship, but an entire squadron through advanced neural links. They thought as one, moved as one, and killed as one. Major Jennifer Davis led the fighter wings from her command ship, watching her pilots tear through Drakmor formations like paper, as the enemy fighters outnumbered the humans 50-1, but it didn't matter. Human weapons could fire through dimensions, appearing inside enemy cockpits without warning. Their ships could accelerate fast enough to turn grown aliens into soup. Alpha Wing reporting came the voice of one pilot. 17 enemy fighters down, they can't even see us coming. But the real show was about to begin. The Drakmor's pride and joy, their massive dreadnought Death's Crown, turned its weapons toward the human fleet. The ship was 3 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to level a continent. It had never been defeated in battle. Captain Beth Thompson's heavy cruiser Retribution moved to intercept. Her ship was half the size of the enemy dreadnought, but she wasn't planning to fight fair. The humans had weapons that attack through time itself. Temporal displacement cannon charging announced the ship's AI target locked. The weapon didn't fire energy or missiles. Instead, it fired time. The beam hit the Death's Crown and began aging its hull at an incredible rate. Metal that had been forged just decades ago suddenly became centuries old, then millennia old. Rust and decay spread across the massive ship like a virus. In less than 30 seconds, the Drakmor's mightiest warship crumbled to dust. 3,000 crew members died not from explosions or fire, but from old age as their bodies experienced hundreds of years in moments. The ship that had terrorized a dozen star systems simply fell apart and drifted away as cosmic debris. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than an hour. The Drakmor had brought 200 ships to destroy Haven's Rest. Now they had less than 50 left, and most of those were damaged beyond repair. Vactor sat in his command chair, watching his life's work dissolve before his eyes. His empire had spent centuries building this fleet, training these crews, developing these weapons. The humans had made it all meaningless in minutes. "Sir, we need to retreat," his tactical officer pleaded. "We can't fight them. This isn't war, it's extermination." Around them, Drakmor ships were trying to flee, but the human fighters were hunting them down one by one. The Ghost Fleet moved through space like sharks in bloody water, efficient and merciless. Every few seconds, another alien ship exploded or simply vanished. "All ships, emergency retreat," Vactor finally ordered, his voice broken and defeated. "Jump to hyperspace immediately." But Admiral Tom Bradley had other plans. He had come here to rescue a colony, but now he saw an opportunity to send a message that would echo across the entire galaxy. The human fleet began moving to intercept the fleeing Drakmor ships. "Let none escape," came the Admiral's cold voice over the communication channel. "The galaxy needs to remember what happens when you attack innocent people." The few Drakmor ships that managed to jump to hyperspace carried with them stories of terror. They spoke of human weapons that could bend reality itself, of ships that could appear and disappear at will, of pilots who fought like they had been born in the void between stars. Word spread quickly through alien communication networks. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had demonstrated that they possessed technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. and they had used it not to conquer or enslave, but to protect a colony of peaceful farmers. The Ghost Fleet had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The silence that followed the battle was almost as terrifying as the fighting itself, where moments before space had been filled with explosions and screaming metal. Now there was only the quiet drift of debris and the distant glow of human ships. Hanging in the void like patient guardians, the few surviving Drakmor vessels limped away into hyperspace, their hulls scarred and their crews traumatized beyond repair. Supreme Commander Vaktar's flagship was among them, but the proud warrior who had arrived to conquer Haven's Rest was gone. In his place sat a broken alien who mumbled about weapons that shouldn't exist and ships that could phase through reality. Within hours, the survivors reached Drakmor space stations and began spreading their stories. At first, nobody believed them. Ships that could age metal to dust in seconds, fighters that moved faster than thought, weapons that fired through time itself. It sounded like the ravings of madmen, but when 17 different ship captains told the same impossible story, the Drakmor Empire began to listen, and feared down on Haven's Rest. Commander Jake Miller walked through the smoking ruins of his command center, still trying to process what he had witnessed. Through the shattered windows, he could see human shuttles landing in the colony's main square. But these weren't soldiers coming to occupy their world. They were engineers. Doctors and relief workers. Captain Lisa Roberts coordinated the massive relief effort from her temporary command post. Human medical teams spread out across the colony, treating wounded Corellians with technology that seemed like magic. Burns that should have taken months to heal were fixed in hours. Broken bones mended with injections that rebuilt tissue at the molecular level. Dr. Rachel Anderson led one of the medical teams, her gentle hands working to save lives that had been written off as lost. The Corellian doctors watched in amazement as she brought people back from the edge of death using techniques they couldn't begin to understand. "How is this possible?" asked Dr. Veltar, the colony's chief medical officer. As he watched Rachel regrow a patient's severed limb, Rachel smiled sadly as she worked. "We had a lot of time to think about healing while we were isolated. When you've seen enough war, you learn to value life more than most species realize." The human engineering teams were equally impressive. They didn't just repair the damaged buildings, they improved them. Shield generators that had failed under Drakmor attack were replaced with human technology that could withstand planet-killing weapons. The orbital defense platforms were rebuilt with armor that could shrug off attacks that would vaporize normal materials. Jake Miller found himself standing next to Admiral Mel Tom Bradley as they watched the reconstruction efforts. The human admiral was older than he had expected, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much war. "Why?" Jake asked simply. "Why did you come? We're not even the same species." Tom was quiet for a long moment, watching human and Corellian children playing together in the temporary shelters. "'Cause that's what we do," he said finally. "We protect those who can't protect themselves." But even as the humans worked to rebuild Haven's Rest, word of their return was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Admiral Bradley received a steady stream of communications from his ship, each one more urgent than the last. "Sir," came the voice of Colonel Danny Wilson from Earth Command, receiving SOS signals from 17 different star systems. But these aren't distress calls from battles or natural disasters. They're requests for protection. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Protection from what?" "From everyone else, sir. Word is already spreading that humanity has returned to active operations. Pirate fleets are scattering. Slave traders are releasing their cargo. Even some of the major empires are pulling back their expansion fleets. More reports came in throughout the day the Vorthan Confederation had immediately ceased their invasion of the peaceful Nalani systems. The Crimson Fleet, a group of raiders that had terrorized merchant ships for decades, had disbanded overnight. 3 different wars had suddenly ended as both sides realized they didn't want to risk drawing human attention. But it wasn't just fear that was driving the galaxy's reaction. It was hope. Species that had been oppressed for generations suddenly saw a chance for freedom. Colonies that had been abandoned by their governments as too remote to defend were sending messages, begging for human protection. Captain Kate Wilson's stealth ship had been monitoring alien communication networks, and her reports painted a picture of a galaxy in transition. "Admiral, it's like someone flipped a switch. Everyone's talking about us, some with fear, some with hope, but everyone's talking." Tom Bradley stood in his command center, looking out at the stars through the reinforced windows. He had come to Haven's Rest thinking he was on a simple rescue mission. Instead, he had kicked over a hornet's nest that had been building pressure for decades. "Sir," came another voice from the communication station. "Priority message from the Galactic Council. They're requesting an immediate meeting to discuss. ... And I quote. The new galactic security situation. Tom almost smiled at that. Galactic Council had ignored human space for 30 years, dismissing Earth as a minor power that preferred isolation. Now they wanted to talk. The age of human isolation was over. The Ghost Fleet had returned to active duty, and with it came all the responsibilities that Tom had hoped to avoid. But as he watched human medics saving alien children and engineers rebuilding homes for families they had never met, he realized that maybe some responsibilities were worth accepting. The most dangerous fleet in galactic history had become something even more powerful, a symbol of hope for the innocent and fear for those who would harm them. The universe would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly what it needed.